Before we get into this next story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.
I need to be honest with you, this story sounds fake. Everything about it, the talking ghost, the future president who ran away, the family curse, the cave, sounds like something someone made up around a campfire in Tennessee and embellished every time they told it. I thought that too. Until I looked at the documentation. Because the Bell Witch haunting isn't just folklore, it's one of the most thoroughly documented supernatural events in American history. Multiple contemporary accounts, sworn testimony, letters from credible witnesses, and the alleged involvement of Andrew Jackson, a man who would become the 7th President of the United States, and who was not by any account the type of person to scare easily. Something happened on that farm between 1817 and 1821. What that something was depends on what you're willing to believe. But what it did, to a family, to a community, and to the historical record, is undeniable. John Bell was a prosperous farmer in Adams, Tennessee, a small community in Robertson County, about 40 miles north of Nashville. He was a deacon in the local Baptist church. He owned land. He had a large family. By every standard of early 19th century rural America, John Bell was a respected, successful man. His farm sat on rolling land near the Red River, good soil, thick tree lines, the kind of property that smelled like fresh cut hay in summer and wood smoke in winter. The house was a log structure solidly built, typical for the region. Nothing about the Bell farm, its history, its construction, its location, suggested anything unusual. No previous reports of disturbances, no tragic history, no burial grounds, just a farm in Tennessee in 1817, until the knocking started. The family first reported strange animal sightings on the property, a large dog-like creature and a bird of unusual size, neither of which corresponded to known local wildlife. Then the sounds began inside the house, knocking on the walls, scratching on the floor, sounds like chains dragging across the attic, sounds like rats gnawing inside the walls, but louder, more deliberate, and in patterns that felt intentional. The Bell children reported their bed covers being pulled off at night. Something grabbed their hair. Something whispered in the dark. Sounds that hovered just below intelligible speech, like someone talking in the next room through a closed door. John Bell initially kept the disturbances private, as any proud farmer and church deacon would. He didn't want to be the man whose house was haunted. But the events escalated, and eventually Bell confided in a neighbor, James Johnston, and asked him to spend the night in the house. Johnston came. Johnston heard the sounds. Johnston left the next morning and told everyone he knew. Word spread through Robertson County the way it did in rural Tennessee in the early 1800s, through church, through the general store, through conversations at property lines and river crossings. People came to the Bell farm. Dozens, eventually hundreds, over the 4 years of the haunting. They came skeptical, they came curious, they came to debunk. And according to the contemporary accounts, collected most thoroughly in a book published in 1894 by Martin Van Buren Ingram, based on diaries kept by the Bell family's son Richard Williams Bell, most of them left convinced that something real was happening inside that house. The sounds escalated, the scratching became pounding, objects moved, furniture shifted, stones were thrown, inside the house with no one visible throwing them. And then, sometime in 1818, the knocking evolved into something far more disturbing. It developed a voice. The voice started as a whisper, breathy, genderless, barely there. It grew. Over weeks it became louder, clearer, and increasingly articulate. It identified itself by multiple names, most commonly Kate, claiming to be the witch of a neighbor named Kate Batts, with whom John Bell had a property dispute. Whether this identification was genuine or performative is one of the central debates of the case. But what is documented by multiple independent witnesses is that the voice could carry on extended conversations. It answered questions, it quoted scripture with precision, it commented on events happening in the community, it sang hymns, and it demonstrated knowledge of events occurring in distant locations simultaneously, describing a dinner party in Springfield, 30 miles away, with details that were later confirmed by attendees. The entity, whatever it was, had favorites and enemies. It treated some members of the Bell family kindly. It was protective of Lucy Bell, John's wife. It reportedly brought her food when she was ill, sang to her, and expressed genuine affection. But toward John Bell himself, the entity was relentless. It harassed him physically, slapping his face, pulling his hair, causing his tongue to swell until he couldn't eat. It tormented him psychologically, taunting him, threatening him, predicting his death. And toward Betsy Bell, the youngest daughter, it focused particular attention, interfering in her romantic relationship with a young man named Joshua Gardner, demanding that Betsy not marry him, and escalating its aggression whenever Betsy and Joshua were together. Most hauntings are vague, unexplained sounds, cold spots, shapes in the dark. The Bell Witch was precise. It had a personality, it had preferences, it had, in the most unsettling way possible, an agenda. In 1819, the Bell Witch was famous enough to reach Nashville, and Andrew Jackson, then a retired general, not yet president, decided to investigate. The account of his visit comes from multiple sources, including the Bell family records and at least one member of Jackson's traveling party. Jackson reportedly arrived at the farm with a group of men, including one who claimed to be a witch tamer, a man who professed expertise in dealing with supernatural entities. According to the account, the group's wagon stopped at the property line. The horses refused to move, the wheels locked despite flat ground and no visible obstruction. They sat, stuck, for roughly 30 minutes, until the voice spoke. From the trees, or the air, or the ground. Nobody agreed on where. It said something to the effect of, "Go on, old hickory, I'll see you tonight." The wagon moved. That night, again according to contemporary accounts from Jackson's party, the witch tamer was the first targeted. He reportedly experienced violent physical contact, pulled from his chair, dragged across the room, while the voice laughed and taunted him. The other men scrambled. Jackson, according to the account, observed the event with what one witness described as a mix of fury and fascination. The group left the next morning. And Jackson reportedly said, and this quote has been attributed to him in multiple early sources, that he would rather fight the entire British Army than spend another night in the Bell House. Whether Jackson actually said those words is debated. Whether he visited the farm is less debated. Multiple independent sources reference the visit, and it would be an unusual fabrication to invent, given that Jackson was very much alive and very much capable of denying it during the decades when the story circulated. He never denied it. On December 20th, 1820, John Bell died. The entity had been predicting his death for months, openly to visitors with the casual cruelty of someone reading a weather forecast. In the days before his death, Bell fell into a stupor. His family found a small vial of dark liquid in the medicine cabinet that no one in the household had purchased. According to Richard Williams Bell's account, the family tested the liquid on the house cat. The cat died. The voice, gleeful, triumphant, claimed responsibility. Whether the entity poisoned John Bell, whether Bell was poisoned by a human actor using the haunting as cover, or whether he died of natural causes and the voice claimed credit opportunistically, the historical record cannot determine. What the record does show is that at John Bell's funeral, the voice was heard singing, loudly, cheerfully, on over the cemetery. Several attendees confirmed hearing it. Nobody saw a source. After John Bell's death, the entity gradually withdrew. The voice grew quieter. The physical disturbances diminished. By 1821, the presence announced it was leaving, and told the family it would return in 7 years. In 1828, according to family accounts, disturbances briefly resumed, about scratching, knocking, muffled voices, but at a fraction of the intensity. The entity reportedly spoke briefly to John Bell Jr. and then departed again, saying it would return in 107 years. The year would have been 1935. No documented activity was reported at the property that year. The farm, however, had long since passed out of the Bell family's hands. The Bell Witch endures in American folklore for a specific reason that separates it from every other haunting story in the country's history. It's not the scariest, it's not the deadliest, it's the most specific. The entity had a name, it had a voice, it carried on extended intelligent conversations with dozens of witnesses over 4 years. It demonstrated knowledge it shouldn't have had. It expressed preferences, emotions, and something that looked, from certain angles, like a personality. Most hauntings are impressions, vague sensations, unexplained sounds, shapes that might be shadows. The Bell Witch was a character, and characters are harder to dismiss than impressions because impressions can be misperception. A character requires authorship, and nobody, in 200 years of debate, has conclusively identified the author. On the former Bell property, now privately owned but accessible through guided tours, there's a cave. It's been called the Bell Witch Cave since the 1800s. The Bells reportedly believed the entity retreated to it between appearances. The cave is real. It's a limestone formation, cool and damp, stretching several hundred feet into the hillside along the Red River. Visitors have reported anomalous experiences inside, sudden temperature drops, the feeling of being touched, sounds with no source. Whether those experiences are genuine, psychologically primed, or the natural effects of a dark cave on a nervous mind is for each visitor to decide. But the cave is there. It's been there since before the Bells. It'll be there long after the debate about what happened in their house is forgotten. And if you stand at its entrance on a quiet evening in Tennessee, with the cicadas screaming in the trees and the Red River murmuring below and the air smelling like wet limestone and honeysuckle, you can decide for yourself whether the darkness inside is empty, or whether something in there is listening, the way it always has been, the way it said it would be.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until the next story.